If you're thinking about starting your own independent consulting business, like I did 10 years ago, then you'll want to watch this video. If you do a search on Google and ask what is consulting, you'll find a variety of generic answers. Things like giving advice, filling in gaps in staffing, or finding niche expertise. These answers are not wrong, but I think most people find them unsatisfying. It leaves them still wondering what the core business model of consulting actually is. In this video, I'm going to describe what I believe the core business model of consulting actually is. I'll describe why it's so hard to articulate, and why I'm no longer considering it a viable business model for my business personally. Articulating the core feature of a business that makes it successful can be extremely difficult. There is a huge incentive for profitable businesses to hide what their true business model is. After all, if you found the formula for making millions, why would you give it away? The small number of people who do give it away will quickly find that their business model doesn't work anymore due to copycat competition. One example that's been discussed a lot recently is the fast food chain McDonald's. If you wanted to start a business that competes with McDonald's, you'd have to figure out why they're so successful. Some people will say that it's all about the secret recipe for the French fries. And if you pursue this, you might spend a bunch of time focusing on the recipe. Some people will say it's all about supply chain management and the efficiency of making sure the food is where it needs to be at the right time. Some people will say it's all about customer service, because if you don't have customers, you don't have revenue. However, apparently the correct answer is real estate. Due to the way that the lease agreements are structured with the franchise owners, this is apparently where most of their money comes from. Another potential example is Costco. If you do a Google search, you'll find a lot of articles that suggest that most of their money comes from memberships. I recall someone years ago telling me that their business model was based on some sort of arbitrage condition with payment terms. It had something to do with the payment terms to the vendors being on the order of 90 days, but obviously customers in the store would pay immediately. According to the internet, their membership dues bring in $4.2 billion. If you do the math on holding their annual revenue for 90 days at the risk-free rate of return, you'll come up with a figure of $3 billion, which would be comparable to the $4.2 billion in memberships. Now, I haven't dug into this enough to know if this is actually how Costco's business model works. The point that I want to drive home is that it can be extremely difficult to figure out what core economic value a business provides to society. And if you want to start a business, you have to get the core business model right. Otherwise, you don't stand a chance against your competition. So, what is the core business model of consulting? I claim that the answer is liquidity. The term liquidity is usually used in finance, but here I'm using it to describe the ease of buying professional services. Hiring a consultant gives you access to professional services that's fast and easy. It's a lot like buying your groceries at the convenience store when everything else is closed. You can get the basic stuff that you need fast, but you're probably not getting the best value for your money. In practice, consultants get hired by entities like governments and corporations whenever they need to ramp up some kind of professional service at a rate faster than they can hire full-time employees. One example of this would be when a large company like Lehman Brothers fails and all of the employees are let go. At the time when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, they had $639 billion in assets. In order to clean up a mess like this, you need an army of low-paid interns who work at a giant consulting firm who can pore over a mountain of poorly documented paperwork from the defunct company. This is an example of how a consulting company is used when you need far more than one employee. But consulting companies are also used when you need far less than one employee. For example, if you see cracks developing in the foundation of a building or a bridge, you might hire a consultant to spend a week doing inspections and then write a safety report on the building. Hiring one full-time staff to re-inspect the same structure over and over again doesn't make sense. In other professions like software development, examples of small engagements might be things like building a small website or an app for a few $1,000s, a one-time database migration process, or to temporarily compensate for an employee who unexpectedly quit. You might be misled into thinking that when you pay for a consultant, you're getting the best expertise, but in my experience, that's not true. You're paying for fast access, not high quality. If you want to do some sort of complicated and obscure reverse merger process with a company in Germany, your local small-town accountant probably won't be able to help you. However, if you ask one of the big four consulting firms like KPMG, they will find someone who can help you. You might not necessarily get the best quality work, but they will get it done in some form, and they will charge you handsomely for it. Over time, these big four firms have developed deep relationships with government. In my opinion, consultants should always be considered temporary, but some of these companies have developed cozy relationships with government that never seem to end. This is why the government pays these consulting companies millions of dollars, but you as a lone independent consultant likely don't stand any chance of getting the same kinds of engagements. Unless you can network your way into the government or a large corporation, you likely don't stand any chance of getting engagements with these kinds of entities. If you want some examples to justify what I'm talking about, just look at some of the latest news headlines about government scandals involving overpaid consultants. Furthermore, if you're starting a single-person independent consulting business, you probably wouldn't even be able to satisfy the requests for a large number of staff anyway. Unless you somehow manage to raise venture capital funding for your consulting business and hire employees, it's just not going to happen. In the case of these large consulting firms, most of the value in their high consulting fees comes from the ongoing relationship and mutual understanding that these companies have with the governments and corporations that they work with. If an individual consultant at a firm does something bad to a client, they can just fire the consultant and replace them because the firm has so many staff. If the client needs to, they can sue the consulting firm for compensation. But for a lone consultant, if you try to sue them, they could just immediately declare bankruptcy and throw a fit. They could also initiate a time-consuming and costly legal process. In this case, there wouldn't be any restitution for the client, and they'd be left with a mess of a project, and it wouldn't be done. In fact, I think this is why most larger companies have a policy of never hiring independent consultants at all. They probably used to until they had one very bad experience, and then they declared never again. From their perspective, it's just too much of a hassle to teach a lone independent consultant how to work with their business. With a lone independent consultant, the potential unhedged liability risk is huge. Another aspect is that the big consulting firms tend to hire fresh graduates that are often described as insecure overachievers. These people are usually recent graduates that are willing to work overtime to prove themselves so they can move on to something better. Usually, the consulting firm will bill them out at 4 to 5 times what they pay the consultant. Now, I said before that I no longer consider independent consulting to be a viable business model for me, and I'll talk a bit more about why I said that. I explained that the business model of a consultant is to provide liquidity for professional services. This means services that require far more than one full-time employee or far less than one full-time employee. Now, based on what I've described in this video, which type of work do you think that a lone independent consultant is more likely to end up with? If you guessed small, irregular pieces of work from poorly funded startups with unstable cash flow, then you're absolutely correct. I've been doing this for about 10 years, and I've always had the hope that at least one of my clients would become a stable business and start sending me lots of high-quality work. Unfortunately, that has not happened. Maybe it has happened to you, and if it has, please leave a comment below so you can enlighten the many other people who are watching this video. As for me, I'm no longer pursuing new clients at all. It's even gotten to the point where I consider it a huge red flag if someone reaches out to me in the first place. In fact, after I release this video, I'll probably get random emails from people offering me small consulting and contracting gigs, but I'll probably ignore all of them. So, this definition of consulting as being a liquidity provider is just my perspective. And like I said, if you end up getting your core business model wrong, you don't stand a chance. So don't take my word as gospel and do your own research.